The following video contains references to war crimes, mental illness, biological warfare, torture, death, experimentation, violence, weaponization of children, a Squid Game ripoff, and war hamsters. Viewer discretion is advised. For those of you that maybe live under a rock, Marvel's kind of set the precedent for superhero movies lately. Up until the early 2000s, you'd get the occasional successful hero movie with things like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies. Some of them. But most of it was crap like Catwoman and even the Incredible Bulk. Not Hulk, Bulk. Look it up. With Phase 1 of Marvel, though, a lot of people in the entertainment industry realized that superhero movies could be pretty lucrative. So we now find ourselves in an era of superhero content every few weeks or months, even days at this point. And the mouse has collected our souls through Disney Plus subscriptions. If you've been feeling the superhero burnout lately, you're probably not alone. We're all gonna start to feel it if we haven't yet. So, with that said, let's talk about space, sci-fi, and superheroes here, shall we? I'm V for Verbatim, and Marvel no longer activates my lizard brain, much to my disappointment. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll know that today is another redesigned video for a story loosely under the sci-fi superhero umbrella. It's a story I'm currently calling Welcome to the Show, a battle royale-esque game show story following the descent into madness and misery of a grieving father and game maker. This is the one where I lose my credibility I may have once had, so get ready, because, as I mentioned a little ways back and at the beginning of this video, my universe is built on the back of space hamsters, and this is where that all comes into play. Let's get started. Welcome to the Show was a comic I made when I was like 12, back in my angsty phase of listening to MLP grimdarks and drawing murder scenes like a tiny edgelord. Those really were the days. The story was about a well-respected hamster creature named Flash, the host of a 5-round game show where the prize was simply the privilege of friendship with a friendly game show host. The comic followed the events of the show's 9th episode, its lost episode. Each first round starts with hundreds of contestants and their numbers dwindle as the games go on, either due to elimination or death. There's a break about halfway through where Flash talks to the winner of episode 1, the only contestant to make it to round 5. He tells Flash that what he's doing is wrong and that he's losing his mind, which Flash brushes off. Flash occasionally says things that are off, twitches, or seems unaffected by the eliminations of the players. They get to round 4, which is an eating challenge following a cooking challenge. The whole concept was all over the place, but one of the players, this emo bunny guy, made some sort of capsule with insane juice in it, and one of the contestants has to eat his dish for round 4. The contestant, Speedy, grows metal claws and stabs out his eye before mauling the last contestant to death once the camera stopped rolling. In reality, the show is a facade, a way to gather the strongest warriors of Flash's race and turn them into weapons. He takes the candidates from round 2 and onward using various chemicals and surgical procedures, one of which causes their skeletons and claws to be encased in an unbreakable metal plating. Emo Bun Bun somehow got a hold of that serum in an attempt to expose the truth behind Flash's operation to the show's audience. Hence, the episode was never actually aired. It's all really messy and stupid sounding, especially because they're hamsters. But don't worry, the show is going to be rewritten over the course of these 5 episodes, and while the hamster element isn't really going to change, you do get to see its evolution alongside me as I attempt to change the tone of the show and generally fix it. Just to establish before we get started though, here's what we're going to have to keep. The story will undergo a lot of changes, but these core elements will remain the same. So with that, rules are in place. Now let's get to the context behind these insanity hamsters. This should be quick for this video. Here's where I kind of have to level with you guys. I've been living a lie. Yes, I've been presenting myself as cold, logical, awkward, and someone that lacks any sort of charisma on camera. But I have some skeletons in my closet. Skeletons that exist and will continue to plague my stories even if I try to sound mostly logical. There's really no way around this. The Pilgrims I've talked about in previous videos, the species that shows up everywhere, they are the hamster warlords in this story, and in every story. I apologize, it cannot be undone. In as much seriousness as is left in me, the Pilgrims are gaseous creatures that are the stars in the universe. At least their ancient ancestors were. As for the current Pilgrims, they are 3-foot, rounded, chubby creatures that are extremely smart and can live for hundreds of years. They take advantage of their cuddly, non-threatening appearance and are in fact the most brilliant shipbuilders and soldiers in the universe. So yeah, this is kind of a thing I apologize for. I've fluctuated from using Pilgrims as these really cute, harmless creatures, to making them war-hardened and angsty characters, to kind of settling on a mix of both for comic relief and irony. That's kind of the main issue I have with this story specifically, writing and chicken scratch doodles aside. Because of the designs, you don't really know what to take seriously, which is especially a problem when these hamsters are characters that are being turned into weapons. But the Pilgrim class system, like the Norcasians of past videos, is kind of important here. Most of the Pilgrim are shipbuilders or weapon manufacturers. They're the middle class, whereas the lowest class is usually made up of farmers and Pilgrim colonies. They're considered lesser beings because they don't serve the war propaganda and honor souls to the rest of their kind. There is some mobility between classes, especially if one serves in the military, the highest class. The highest class, the goal of all Pilgrim soldiers, is the Pilgrim High Military, an order of the top 1,000 most decorated soldiers that serve as a council for matters both political and militaristic. They're the most respected and most referenced in terms of war propaganda, a position rather appealing to an otherwise overlooked individual in the Pilgrim Empire. If you've watched some of my earlier videos, I mentioned a Pilgrim named Flash briefly, since he's the father of the Astral family, a team of superheroes on Earth, and the main protagonist of the Chasing Rainbows redraw videos. He's a force of good in most cases, but he's technically the antagonist of this story. So how does that work exactly? Well, this is where we get into alternate timelines, because this is one of the major ones, especially the most major example of an unstable timeline. The MCU isn't the only one to do this sort of thing, but not to brag or anything, but I do think I do a tiny little, incredibly better job at differentiating universes from timelines and dimensions. Sorry, Marvel, I'm sure it's more clear-cut in the comics. To understand how this world works, you first have to understand the void. Imagine for a second a huge circle cut into hundreds of thousands of slices. The lines that separate each slice intersect at a single point in the middle of the circle. That's what the void is. It's a space with no time, overlapping dimensions, no universes, but it branches out to separate universes from one another, the hundreds of slices in the circle. Most characters that dimension hop travel through the void but only see a fraction of it, typically those branching areas closer to their universe. The universe of my stories is the Hydroverse, and I haven't developed the others, but in other universes it's rare to find duplicates of people from another universe, because they are separated by the ultimate veil of separation, the void. Dimensions overlap universes. They're constants across universes because they are the origins of forces of nature that characterize their physics and science. The time and mind realm, both dimensions, exist in all universes and are the same realms in all universes. However, interaction between universes isn't possible through dimension hopping, since dimensions don't exist in the void. And again, the void is the barrier between universes. In Doctor Strange, universes have doubles of people and they act as alternate routes characters could have taken, but what they call universes in that movie are simply timelines in mine. I can't use the same visual as before, but imagine timelines as strands in a massive wad of possibilities. In any universe, they begin at a single point and quickly branch off into hundreds of thousands of different timelines. This would be difficult to keep track of. An immeasurable amount of decisions happen every day, so the flow of time should be chaotic. Generally, though, these timelines are so similar to each other that repeats will fuse into one another and collapse. Other timelines will be so different from central timelines that they become unstable over time. In those cases, the void opens up so that the timeline is absorbed, sort of like a universe-ending black hole coming to prune unstable timelines. Paradoxes are possible. People can see their past or future selves without repercussion in some cases. But in order for that to be sustainable, there has to be a buffer of some kind to handle the instability, usually involving dimensional intervention. For example, Max Astral traveled 5 years into his own past and consistently interacted with himself. He's able to get away with that because he made a deal with the Foreman and Mr. Bones of the Dimension of the Dead. He exchanged the lives of children for his own personal gain. I think I said this was going to be quick, but in hindsight, I realized that was a lie. Anyway, there are 10 main timelines, so that works out to 2 per video in this series. We'll be going over them in order of severity, starting with the most harmless ones today, the Anti-Max timelines. Both timelines have no conventional Max Astral or Astral family, so there is no destabilizing 2057 event in either timeline. They actually last longer than the classic timeline as a result. The lack of Max Astral as a sort of anchor, however, makes those timelines slightly less stable overall than the main timeline. They are as follows. The B timeline, which was basically made as a potential reboot world that I started working on but abandoned pretty quickly. The main difference is that Matthew was an only child that wasn't taken over by a demon. He ends up evil regardless and has a son that serves as a vigilante under his nose alongside a team of heroes that work at Max's company, Legacy. The versions of these characters and their names, Nicole, Azubo Black, Edward Barton, and Clen, transferred over to the story of the Nightmare timeline, which I will get into in episode 3. It diverged from the collective timeline in 2020. The original Anti-Max timeline. This timeline exists for the opposite reason as the first. Unlike having characters that are meant to replace an old concept, this timeline was made to be a place for some of my old character designs to inhabit. Matthew and the Astral family didn't exist at all, and many 2040s characters from the normal timeline exist in the 2010s. This timeline diverged from the collective timeline at point 0, an ambiguous point before recorded history. So yeah, lots more to this story than the last. Also lots less, but, well, you'll see. Today we're going to be redesigning and going over the stories behind 4 characters only. Because each character is a contestant in this game show, personality and story role aren't as important. So I get to talk about designs this time. Fun for me. First, we have Riku. Each character had like one physical trait, and for Riku, that was kind of his bandana thing around his head. He's meant to resemble a dog, and he's loyal, I guess. He and this other rabbit character are lovers, and he originally got his bandana thing from her. He was mangled during the events of the lost episode, and he has blades in place of his arms and legs. Daisy is Riku's lover. She's meant to resemble a rabbit, and she's airheaded. Her personality is love interest. After she was eliminated and experimented on, she was almost completely torn up. Her eye, bits of her skull, her ear, and her arm all had to be replaced with metallic prosthetics, including an arm cannon, which I think is one of the few things that distinguishes her from the other characters. Boney is just an emo bunny. He's intelligent, especially brilliant with chemistry, because he was originally the pet and lab partner of a brilliant alchemist. He was injured and exposed to the types of chemicals used by the game makers before the events of the story, which is part of the reason why his demeanor is a little gloomier and why he hides his eye, because he lost part of his face to the chemicals. After he was eliminated, he lost his ear and got a few scratches, but that was about it. He's a little more lucid than some of the others due to his tolerance for the chemicals used on him, and he's a scientist for the game makers. Lastly, Matthias is meant to resemble a rabbit, however, he isn't exactly a rabbit because he wears prosthetic ears because he wants to be a rabbit. He ends up getting one of Emo Bun Bun's ears and one of Daisy's, and the game makers let him command the army of the other eliminated contestants. The stories and the designs are pretty basic, so instead of just making new characters, I really think I can build off what we have here. Starting with Mamoru was seen as this poster boy for the Pilgrim Empire. He was like a little pampered warrior that believed in the Empire more than anyone else because of his treatment over others. He didn't exactly realize how lucky he was, so he's not entitled, just ignorant and expecting of good treatment by everyone he comes across. He was an Earth Scout on behalf of the Pilgrim High Military. As the child of one of their old members, his goal in the game was to prove that he deserved a position among them instead of as their errand boy. Mamoru was the last player eliminated in the lost episode. After he was experimented on, he was given a position as a leader of the game maker's army. But as with his previous life, he remained a poster boy, shown to the other victims as an example of how far you could go if you were obedient. Mamoru was originally really inspired by Japanese stereotypes. I went through a couple of ideas, but figured that giving up on the Japanese influence completely was taking away a lot of the physical elements that made up his character. So I kind of ran with the Japan stuff and improved in places, hopefully. Firstly, the name. I wanted it to be more of a connection to the name Mammon, which I'll explain at the end of this video. But the name Mamoru itself means protector. Fundamental design-wise, Pilgrims are meant to resemble different mammals. Flash and Speedy, parental figures of the Astral family in past videos, sort of resemble hamsters. In redesigning this character, I went for a clearer, specific dog breed than just giving him long ears and calling it good enough. He's based on an Akita. Not only does the round, friendly face of an Akita fit his bright, happy, poster child appearance, but the story of the most famous Akita in Japan, Hachiko, the dog who waited for his late master at a train station until his own death, is a connection to Mamoru's story and patience in waiting for his lost love. I struggled with the legs for a bit, but anatomy done, I went for a second animal inspiration in his armor. The shapes and style of the armor are both meant to resemble a snake. Side pieces are meant to look a little more scale-like, and my favorite addition, his shoulder armor plating being shaped like a snake's head, sort of. Armor has always been kind of hard for me, so my goal was to make his suit cohesive with a uniting idea to keep it focused. That being the serpentine imagery and later the coloration. The sword arm admittedly ended up looking a little cooler than it had any right to be, but I struggled to give weapons personality and a little bit of extra flair, so this was a lot of experimenting that kind of went right for some reason. It's not the most disciplined, but before I color things in, I shade areas of my sketches to see where darker colors would work best. It was especially helpful here since armor isn't my forte. I went through a few patterns and placements of colors, but while that was kind of difficult, placing Mamoru's bandana was definitely the most challenging thing for me. After looking at his original design, I remembered that he lost an eye in his episode, so what better place to feature such an important element of his character than smack dab on the center of his face? Subtlety does not exist. But anyway, that's pretty much it. This is objectively the second best of this group, but my personal favorite is yet to come. Amadeus is another person given a position of power among the army of Game Maker experiments. She entered the games to support Mamoru. Both of their parents were members of the high military, and unlike Mamoru, Amadeus was in line to take her father's place. She didn't look it, but she was a strategist, and could take on Mamoru in a fight any day. Knowing it would make her friend insecure, she didn't ever try to take him on in a fight, but instead encouraged him to keep improving. His headband was actually hers once, and she gave it away as a gesture of friendship. Mamoru is oblivious to her romantic advances, but they are a major part of her story. Amadeus was eliminated in the third round, but reassured her lover that they would meet again, and they would theoretically. After her experimental trials, she was equipped with an arm cannon and a metal skeleton, weapons to enforce punishment upon misbehaving test subjects. This is the design I said screw it and threw in everything I could think of. With Amadeus' design, I just had so many ideas, and there was no self-control here. She was based on a jackrabbit, but her armor is a ram-bull combination, specifically based on the demon Prince of Lust and his 3 heads. I really went for the Lust Prince imagery wherever I could here. The gas mask she wears has 2 horns protruding from it where the heads of the bull and ram would be, and I included hearts in the gas mask's shape. Her armor was also just a little fuzzier than the other designs. I took advantage of her general rabbit appearance and made her small and less muscular. She's a killing machine, but I didn't want her femininity to be lost. Mamoru underestimated her in their past lives, and I wanted the design to reflect why he felt that way. That needed to be shown even in her post-experiment design. My favorite part has to be the ears, though. They really set her apart from the others this time around. I wanted her to resemble a jackrabbit specifically because I wanted the ears to really shine here, and the mechanical ear especially was really fun to figure out how to make the segments and stuff. That and a color palette, well, I don't think the colors did her any justice. I'm glad I swapped out some of my brighter pinks for mellower ones. The colors have a less eye-bleeding quality to them, even if I'm not a fan of how the purple clashes with the musty pinks. But here she is, a jackrabbit lust demon barbarian girl boss. I have no regrets and still think she looks cool even if she's a little extra here. Belial is the first of the 4 characters here with earthly origins. He was born in a Pilgrim colony during the 1600s. Exposed to a period of scientific advancement in post-Enlightenment England, he became enamored with the art of alchemy despite its roots in fiction, and he became a chemist for his empire. He was the father of chemical warfare for the empire, but his exposure to the chemicals he worked with permanently affected his personality. He had a counterpart on Earth that accomplished similar feats, but due to his disposition, he was given the nickname the Mad Alchemist by those familiar with both of them. He entered the games on behalf of his superiors, since they suspected unauthorized use of his inventions by the game makers. He ended up being eliminated in the 3rd round, and once his brain was basically melted by his own chemicals in the hands of the game makers, he became a subservient scientist for them. At least that is what they're led to believe. In reality, Belial is a patient man, biding his time in his subservient position until his superiors send another unsuspecting victim into the games for him to assist. Assist or something more sinister, because against his wishes, His descent into madness is unavoidable. God, Belial was just way too difficult for me to work with. I don't know why, but drawing dynamic yet unique-looking lab coats is just beyond me. I struggled and kind of had to redraw him, but I decided to use the sin Sloth as inspiration in a unique way. Sloth is inaction, laziness, like something pulling you down to keep you from your due diligence. Belial has a special ability related to that. In my revision of his character, Belial has the ability to create branch-like constructs to hold down his test subjects. Dark, looming branches that only he can see until they make contact with his unsuspecting victim. I drew him with the dark branches behind him and in different places in his design, but I did tone down the branch imagery later to focus on the coat. His ears, too, really weren't working for me. He was a lop-eared rabbit originally to make him look more edgy with the emo look he had going for him, which doesn't really work anymore now that he's more rooted in his alchemy work. So to kind of make better use of them, he ties his remaining ear over his face to protect himself from exposure to his own chemicals. The second ear, meanwhile, is weaponized and adds as another extension of his branch constructs in restraining people and potentially harming them. His arm, unlike Mamoru's, is more of a device to open up the subject's body and expose them to his various testing serums. And with that done, I went through and changed him up a little. I'm not really a fan of the colors I chose here, but they do help him stand out a little more, so I say that's sort of a win? I don't know. As my least favorite, I definitely have some work to do before I really fall in love with his design, but it's not a terrible start. Levi is a more complicated character. He was the only character fully psychotic before he entered the games. Levi was one of 18 brothers and sisters in a poor farming colony of the Pilgrim Empire, and he wasn't exactly treated well. Given the size of his family, he wasn't noticed for much other than his mistakes. As his siblings grew and joined the Pilgrim High Military, he was unable to do the same due to his smaller, weaker build. He was not physically fit enough for high-intensity combat, but over time he twisted it into a shortcoming of other biological differences between him and his siblings. They had inherited longer ears from their mother, and he became obsessed with proving that ear shape affected hormones and granted his siblings an advantage over him in some way. In a psychotic fit of rage, he cut off his own ears and killed his eldest sister as she tried to restrain him. He took this as a twisted validation, since removing his problematic anatomical components led to him overcoming his sister and her superiority. Levi entered the games to avoid being arrested for his crimes, and he was eliminated in the second round. Not being particularly smart, kind, or strong, since he spent most of his life coming up with excuses for his shortcomings instead of becoming his best self, he wasn't exactly the best candidate for leadership. The game makers saw potential in him, though, so he was the only known character that was not experimented on, apart from the surgical attaching of 2 longer ears on his head. He's technically the most lucid contestant and was given a position as gamekeeper, the one who would maintain order against the other eliminated contestants, including Mamoru, Amadeus, and even Belial, until he was granted a position among the game makers. In a way, his fate was a happy ending for him, and it also makes him the most direct antagonist since he interacts with every main character of the story before they reach the game makers. Levi was the character I had the clearest idea for. I was going back and forth a little bit, but I decided that Levi would work best if he resembled a hyena, since the ears are short and the creepy laugh they have is just so perfect for him. For this past self, I drew him before he cut off his ears since I didn't feel like drawing gore. I did draw scars on his mouth since it kind of felt right to me that he would maybe do something like that. Very Joker-esque, and that's really the inspiration behind him. Imagine an immature Joker that blames everyone except himself for the world's problems. He doesn't wear armor or a lab coat or anything, at least on the surface. I imagine him wearing a bulletproof vest or something underneath more casual clothing, partially to bulk himself up a little bit, but also because it makes his childish self feel powerful to boss around hundreds of armored living weapons in nothing but jeans and a hoodie. Deep down, that hatred for his physical appearance is still there, so he hides behind a mask at all times. It accentuates the hyena grin, big eyes, things that he fakes, as well as a powerful gait to compensate for a lack of true confidence and physical strength. I combined that image with the ears he believes empower him to give this tiny, sad excuse of a man an insecure, young lunatic vibe. His color palette is a little calmer with the blue tones, but the choice of mellow blues is meant to give him an opposite color scheme to Belial, who is in a very similar position of madness and colonial origins, but has the capacity to realize that he's wrong, unlike his murderous superior here. I think if I redrew them, I would swap the color palettes. But yeah, I finished him up. He's probably my favorite, but I still think I could make him a little bit better in later drawings, most notably with the color palette, and making him look a little bit more electric and high energy. As you watch a tiny bit of this baggy redraw I did a while ago on screen, I'm going to mention a really important aspect of this story: demon connection. Right now, I'm in a super weird Dante's Inferno phase, thanks to the show the character on screen is from. Thanks so much, Vivzy Pop. But in past redraws, there were major connections to the story of Dante's Inferno. Matthew in Chasing Rainbows was taken over by a mind demon. The three leads in my Chardonnay and Clover redraw were physical embodiments of the deeper rings of hell. And here, we're talking princes of hell, but not the literal princes. That's for a redraw much farther down the road. The names I chose for these characters are not coincidental. Levi's name has a connection to the Prince of Envy, Belial's to Sloth, Amadeus to Lust, and Mamoru's to Greed. The reason behind it? Well, they're the leaders of the Game Maker's army, and the goal of the head Game Maker is to transform them into his own army of demon equivalents to oppose the actual demon race. That all sounds pretty out there, but I will be explaining this as we go through the next redraws. So the experiments are being changed and warped to become a new demon army, with Belial, Levi, Amadeus, and Mamoru as four of its new princes. As for the other three, the three most tied to the devil himself, you'll just have to see with the next few redraws where the story goes. In all seriousness, that's where I'll leave it today. I've got 4 characters down for the B plot, and I'm already looking forward to the next redesigns. I get to be a little bit more creative with the next few characters since they have 0 personality. Yay for me. But that's really gonna do it. If you liked this video, you know how YouTube works, so do what you will. And hopefully you have a nice day today. This is V for Verbatim signing off until the next video. Take care and be excellent to one another. Bye! Someday you'll find it. The Wi-Fi connection, the writers, the editors, and Steve. Who the hell is Steve? What am I doing? Oh my god.